recently there seem to be a lot of stories coming from within the US, especially in blue states, with parents that are very concerned about how their schools are pushing critical theory upon their children. And there are many reasons for this. Number one is the behavior of the people doing the pushing. These people usually form mobs or groups that then target individuals who disagree with the critical theory. So there was one article where a couple of parents were meeting in secret. You know, these are la resistance, I suppose. And they were talking how their own children would come home and they would say, "Daddy, do not speak with that parent because that parent is against critical theory. And if you're seen speaking with him, it's going to affect my future." Which is kind of bizarre because it's usually the parent that tells the children, "Hey, don't hang out around that kid because that kid is no good." Now the situation has reversed. It's the Romanian saying of teaching daddy how to have children. It's like when the kid is the one lecturing the parent. And these are the elites in the United States. I mean, these are schools that cost a lot to send your kid to. And the parents are acting like YouTube skeptics now, meeting in secret in order to discuss these things which they are being concerned. At another school, there was something worse that happened. You had the teachers organizing into mobs in order to figure out parents who were against critical theory, try to get them doxxed, and then try to get them fired. So it's also the behavior, it's not just the ideology that is being pushed. Then a lot of parents are pointing out that, well, we send our kids to these expensive schools so they learn how to think rather than what to think. And critical theory is a very imperialist ideology. It doesn't allow for any sort of dissent. It cannot be questioned. It doesn't allow for people to disagree with it. It's inherently constructed in a way that if you disagree with critical theory, that proves you're a racist. But the worst of it is that it's an illiberal ideology. It claims to try to end racism, although it's never proven that where critical theory exists, racism goes down. But what it does do is that it uses stereotypes and teaches people how to be prejudiced against other individuals. It's kind of like me creating an ideology, and I would name it anti-violence. And the ideology would be to stereotype people that I would consider might be violent and teach others that whenever you see an individual that has the potential of being violent, I want you to beat him up. Like, beat him up before he can be violent. And if everyone does this, then we're going to end violence. And when you point out, hey, V, you're pushing a very violent ideology, I'll be like, nonsense, it's called anti-violence, it's in the name. So, just like National Socialism, it's in the name, right? And the critical theorists have created an ideology which is called anti-racism, right? Because it's in the name, it's anti-racist, it can't be racist, right? Now, there is a parent from a school called Burley, and this school is a private school. It costs around $54,000 a year in order to send your kid there. So we're talking about America's elites doing these things. And he decided to pull his daughter out because of reasons which he elaborates in an entire letter. A letter which has gotten viral, and we're going to read it together and comment on it. But what's interesting, and this is the best part, he says that if Burley's administration was truly concerned about so-called equity, it would be discussing the cessation of admissions preferences for legacy siblings and those families with especially deep pockets. In other words, if you're European, you might not know this, but in the United States, there are certain institutions which are very prestigious, and they have these programs that allow admission based on legacy. So if your father managed to go to that university, you as the son also have a place there. So it's very difficult to do equity with these prestigious places, right? Like, they're not going to get people from the ghetto. They're not going to get impoverished people. No, right? But they do talk about equity all of a sudden. They're very progressive, but they don't really have to change anything. They're still going to be the same institution that they were yesterday. It's now that they're just doing critical theory without actually being like, all right, you know, fine. Let's have equity. Let's get some impoverished people from the ghettos in our class. Let's have some spots for them. They're not going to do that because it's going to taint the prestige, right? Like, the prestige is very important. And the father calls them out on their bullshit. If the administration was genuinely serious about diversity, it would not insist on the indoctrination of its students and their families to a single mindset, most reminiscent of the Chinese Cultural Revolution. In other words, what these people do is, like, they use the word diversity, but they don't really mean diversity, because critical theorists promote other critical theorists. They would rather have another cisgender straight white man that's also into critical theory than they would have someone like Candace Owens. In fact, just to hammer this point through, on BBC, their chief diversity officer said that renowned actor Idris Elba isn't black enough. Why is he not black enough? Because he doesn't eat the proper food and he doesn't have enough black friends. I'm not the one that said this, because this is incredibly racist. But see, I'm not an anti-racist, I'm a liberal. There are other tools that you can use to fight racism. I think liberalism works. I genuinely do think that's an ideology that Martin Luther King had it, and it works great at fighting racismus. But anti-racists get to say all of the crazy things nowadays, and it's fine because it's in the name, right? It's anti-racist. So let's look at the letter. He said that our family recently made the decision not to re-enroll our daughter at Brearley for the next school year. She has been at Brearley for 7 years. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. Okay, don't freak out in the comments. I haven't been to Brearley to learn how to spell properly or pronounce. Haven't had the privilege. I didn't have the legacy. Beginning in kindergarten. In short, we no longer believe that the school administration and board of trustees have any of our children's best interests at heart. Moreover, we no longer have the confidence that our daughter will receive the quality of education necessary to further her development into a critically thinking, responsible, enlightened, and civic-minded adult. I write to you as a fellow parent to share our reasons for leaving the community of the school, but also to urge you to act before the damage to the school, to its community, and to your own child's education is irreparable. It cannot be stated strongly enough that the school's obsession with race must stop. It should be abundantly clear to any thinking parent that the school has completely lost its way. The administration of the Board of Trustees have displayed a cowardly and appalling lack of leadership by appeasing an anti-intellectual, illiberal mob and then allowing the school to be captured by that same mob. What follows are my own personal views on the school's anti-racism initiatives, but these are just a handful of the criticisms that I know other parents have experienced. And he is right, because the letter went viral. If he was talking about, like, this is something that I notice a lot of mainstream media like to gaslight, and they say, like, this isn't a problem, like the guy is making it up. If he is making it up, why is it getting viral? Like, if I were to complain about something that doesn't exist, like, let's say I would complain that teachers are trying to put children to sleep in their classroom and no one else experiences that, it wouldn't go viral. Right? This is very disingenuous. It reminds me of the time people were pushing intelligent design in schools, and I was against that as well. Because I think morality and moral values are something that the parents should teach. But that's why I'm a right-winger. Right-wing focuses on the family. On the family unit is the most important thing. And the relationship between parents and children. Left-leaning people focus on institutions. They believe institutions are the most important thing, which is why when you go very far to the left, you end up with people advocating against the family unit. Because they believe it's the job of the corporation, the job of social media, the job of the mainstream media, the job of schools to educate children, not only just how to think, but what to think, not about how to get a job, but more importantly on the morality and progressive ideology, which is becoming very popular right now. The interesting thing, like, I don't know if this is the case in the United States, but here in Romania, I want to say, like, I know everything about hypercomplex numbers and even quantum physics. We had an introductory course, I think it was in 11th or 12th grade. Like, I know that shit, but I never found out, like, how to write a resume, how to write a letter of intention, how to get a job, how to start a business, how to do tax. All of these things aren't in the resume anymore. But when it comes about racismus, oh, they're right up there. Maybe in a way it's a good thing. You know, like if you're going to have an anti-racist course, teach children not to go on social media anymore with their real names attached. Because you may never know what you're typing today can get you fired 10 years in the future. Like we have seen cases with this happening where today's morality is dictated by tomorrow's headline. So today, all you say can be fine and accepted, but you don't know what's going to happen a month from now, and all of a sudden people get freaked out. I mean, one of the editors, what was it, Vogue? Yeah, a Vogue editor found out about this. Like, well, the thing she said at the time, perfectly acceptable, free speech. Then, boom, bam, thank you, ma'am. She was immediately canceled for her offensive opinions, which she said when she was a kid. It's kind of funny, you know, like we usually allow children to have more leeway because we don't consider them to be fully adults. So we don't punish them as harshly. We don't hold them to account most of the time as harshly. But if you say something dumb on social media, it's considered like 100% intent, and they definitely meant to do it. So we need to punish them even years in the future. Horrible ideology, by the way, but it is what it is. The parent says he objects to the view that I should be judged by the color of my skin. I cannot tolerate a school that not only judges my daughter by the color of her skin, but encourages and instructs her to be prejudiced to others because of their skin. By viewing every element of education, every aspect of history, and every facet of society through the lens of skin color and race, we are desecrating the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. and utterly violating the movement for which such civil rights leaders believed, fought, and died. So this is what critical theory is, okay? Critical theory doesn't try to understand how things work. This is in the words of Herbert Marcuse. Critical theory actually tries to criticize why a society fell short of Marxism goals, like why it hasn't reached equity. So the idea is to constantly criticize everything because the system is corrupt, and by criticizing the system cannot function properly. So it has to now focus on addressing the huge number of criticisms rather than actually doing what it's supposed to do. In other case, in this particular situation, instead of educating children on how to get a job and making sure that they know how to think, it focuses on everything else than what's the actual purpose of the school. I object to the charge of systemic racism in this country and at our school. Systemic racism, properly understood, is segregated schools and separate lunch counters. It is the interning of the Japanese and the exterminating of Jews. Systemic racism is unequivocally not a small number of isolated incidents over a period of decades. Ask any girl of any race if they have ever experienced insults from friends, have ever felt slighted by teachers, or have ever suffered the occasional injustice from school at which they have spent up to 13 years of their life. And you are bound to hear grievances, some petty and some not. We have not had systemic racism against blacks in this country since the civil rights reforms of 1960, a period of more than 50 years. To state otherwise is flat-out misinterpretation of our country's history and adds no understanding to any today's societal issues. If anything, long-standing and widespread policies such as affirmative action point in precisely the opposite direction. So, what he is talking about here is that critical theorists were trying to understand, and this is like going all the way back to the Frankfurt School, they were trying to understand why is it that in the West the Marxist revolution didn't happen. And they believed that because the West had a culture which was brainwashing people, it was making people feel comfortable and complacent within their oppression. And as such, critical theorists believe it's their job in order to show to people that they are actually being oppressed. So even though you don't know it, if you're a minority, you are actually being oppressed. If you're a woman, you're being oppressed. A feminist will tell you how or why. If you're a black person, a critical theorist will explain to you why you're being oppressed. Now, they can't really point to the oppression, which is why it's systemic, right? It just exists. And this is actually what systemic means, right? Because they got a word for every type of racism. If a person does racism to another person, that's interpersonal racism. If a law is racist. That's institutional racism. Systemic racism is any group which fails to achieve equity, and because there is no equity, it must be systemic, which means they can't point to where it is, but it exists. It's the racism of the gap. It's very similar to that framing, the God of the gaps. Like when people in the past couldn't explain a scientific phenomenon, it was God did it, right? This is the exact same thing here. If they notice a negative interaction and they can't explain why it happens, it's either racism, sexism, or other sort of phobia. The wage pay gap, why is it? Well, it's systemic. We don't know exactly why is it happening, but it's a problem. So it must be because of sexism. No other explanation. It can't be that maybe people choose to go into journalism, which is a lower paid profession, then they choose to go into engineering, which is a higher paid profession. And even then they would say, but you see, the reason people make that choice is because when women look at the engineering school, it's not welcoming. It's and they make up some bullshit. It's like scientists wear ostracizing shirts, for example, and it keeps women out because of that particular bro culture. Like women find men icky, and the bro culture is pushing them towards journalist school or HR or any other thing rather than when it's well-paid profession like engineering. The father continues and says, I object to the idea that blacks are unable to succeed in this country without aid from government or from other whites. Barely by adopting critical race theory is advocating the abhorrent viewpoint that blacks should forever be regarded as the helpless victim. They are incapable of success regardless of their skin, talents, or hard work. What Broly is teaching our children is precisely the true and correct definition of racism. So they actually believe that like Idris Elba, right, like the diversity officer there says that he is not black enough. Like what these people believe is in the authenticity. This is why critical theory cannot be debunked. So they believe that if you are a person that's a minority and you're doing it well, like Idris Elba, that's because he has internalized the oppression. It's I know it's ridiculous when you put it into words, but it's literally what the academics are saying. Like, think about the Matrix, you know, that guy that wanted to betray the people from Zon, and he wanted to take the blue pill back, and he spoke with the machines, and he said, look, put me back in the Matrix and make me a millionaire or something, because I want to forget about this reality. That's literally what they think, right? So they think that you got the minorities who have the authentic experience, which are the minorities that promote critical theory or accept the fact that they're being oppressed. And then you have like minorities like Kanye West, the Hodge twins, people who reject critical theory and they are not authentic, right? Like this is what they're talking about. And obviously it's racist as fuck. I mean, they create the stereotype and then everyone that doesn't fit within the stereotype is a problem. So you really can't, like if you're a white person and you try to explain to them that you disagree, well, then you're a racist, because obviously, you know, anything you say comes from the mindset of the oppressor. And if you're a woman that disagrees with feminism, for example, it's because you have internalized misogyny. That's, you can't, like, logic doesn't exist in this ideology. Logic does not exist in this dojo. I object to mandatory anti-racism training for parents, okay? Like, when did this became a thing? Because for me, this one is new. When I went to school, okay? My mom was working hard in order to get money so she can pay for my school. Apparently now, you pay $53,000 in order to have the privilege for your kid to get an education, and that's not enough. You now need to also go to your school in order to get like anti-racist training programs for the parents. It's madness. It's insane. Yeah, I can see why they're pissed off about it. And not to mention, like as I mentioned before, there are groups of people that if you don't attend, you're suspicious. I don't know if they're going to dox you just for not attending the program, but definitely it's not okay not to attend. Especially when presented by the rent-seeking charlatans of Pollyanna. Yeah, most critical theorists are usually problematic people. Like, they're not model citizens. I've yet to meet one. And this is not about critical theory, by the way, or this ideology. Usually, even when you talk about religion, like the most pious people ever, there was some of the people that are a little bit, let's say, more immoral. My personal experience, okay? This is my truth. Like, from my experience, the more a moral busybody a person is, the more problematic they turn out to be. These sessions, in both their content and delivery, are so sophomoric and simplistic, so unsophisticated and inane, that I would be embarrassed if they were taught to barely kindergartners. They are an insult to parents and unbecoming of any educational institution, let alone of Broly's caliber. I object to Broly's vacuous, inappropriate, and fanatical use of words such as equity, diversity, and inclusiveness. By the way, there's a new one coming. I'm telling you from reading the literature. Like, all of you are familiar with the DIE, right? The diversity, inclusiveness, equity. There's another one. The fourth one is accountability. You heard it here first, folks. You heard it here first. Like, when you're seeing it in the video, we talked about accountability. If Broly's administration was truly concerned about equity, as I mentioned, they would drop their legacy. And if they were focused on diversity, they would not try to indoctrinate students, similar to the Chinese Cultural Revolution. Instead, the school would foster an environment of intellectual openness and freedom of thought. And if Broly really cared about inclusiveness, the school would return to the concepts encapsulated in the motto, One Broly, instead of teaching the extraordinarily divisive idea that there are only and always two groups in the country, victims and oppressors. This is Marxist ideology, Marxist framework. The Nazis also had it, it's the socialism in the national part. There's two types of people in society, victims and oppressed. And as such, the victims are the underdog. They need to be promoted, they need to be lifted up in order to have a violent revolution against the oppressors, seize the wealth of the oppressor, and then redistribute it among the victims. This type of ideology always leads to genocide, which is why I prefer liberalism. It doesn't view the world like that. It views the world through individuals. Groups do not get oppressed. Individuals do get oppressed or do the oppression. All right? Name the person. Do not talk about the group. Right, so the letter goes on and on. I think we're going to waste time if I read all of it. But in the end, he says people need to speak out. There is strength in numbers. Like, from his knowledge, there are more parents that do not like it. And by the way, there is the rule of the 9%. It only takes 9% radicals to overthrow a system because most people are quiet about it. This actually works. Like, if you have a school with 100 parents, all it takes is 9 outspoken parents that freak out because, I don't know, like, let's say they're evangelical Christians and they want the school to be more evangelical. They freak out that the kids do not say a prayer before lunchtime. And most parents will be like, oh, yeah, fine, just say the prayer before lunch. And they keep pushing for change and change and change. They're very outspoken because that's what a radical is. It's a person that understands the ideology and wants to promote the ideology. So probably the biggest amount of parents are on critical theorists. Like, let's be honest, all right? I'm a human being that has lived on planet Earth and know that if I were to spend $54,000 for my kid to get an education, I would tell the school to fuck off if it required me to get any sort of training. Like, I don't give a shit about what you're doing. Like, any program that's meant for the parents, I would tell them to fuck off. I got a job. I need to entertain some people. I need to be funny. I need to make jokes so that I get super chat. I don't have time for that shit. Alright, like that alone would piss me off. Hopefully you enjoyed this. You're probably going to find this letter all over the internet because it's gotten viral. I haven't seen many people attacking it though, but I do expect like CNN is going to, or some other progressive outlet is immediately going to go on the case. I would be surprised if this father doesn't get doxxed. But we'll see, you know, like you never know. What is interesting is that a lot of people in the comment sections were agreeing that, yeah, this is bad, like we don't like it. It's very oppressive, reminds them of the Chinese Revolution. So, I don't know, like if more people pull their kids out, maybe things will change. It's different for public schools, right? Like public schools get paid no matter what. Private schools, oof, they might actually experience the brokenness of the wokeness. We'll see. Let me know what you guys think. Hopefully you enjoyed this, and I'll see you on my other channel. Take care.